I think this is a graphics card you should buy right now. Not because it is powerful, not because it has the latest tech, not because it's a good choice generally, but because it's the only one that makes any sense in early 2021. In a market where most GPUs sell for frankly ridiculous prices, and a side note here, I feel I owe an apology to my Brazilian friend who kept telling me we had it really good over here in Europe, now I feel your pain. This RX 480 and especially the 4GB version is simply a rare sunshine at around 100 Great British pounds or 120 euro, which is roughly $140. That might seem like a lot, and it is, but considering 970s sell for 200 pounds and up, and RX 570s, which are inferior to this in every way, sell for 150 pounds and up, it starts to make a lot of sense. As for any card with 6 or 8 GB, forget about it, that's untouchable at the moment because of their desirability for crypto mining. So I picked this one up in London a few weeks back, and I have been daily driving it since then to make sure it is 100% working as intended. As a general rule, never take apart the GPU until you are absolutely sure it is okay, because you'll never be able to tell if something you did or just purchased that way, meaning that a lot of the sites that offer buyer protection you would be ineligible because you can't really prove you got it broken. In any event, judging from the Furmark screenshot and the fact that the card is caked with dust, I'm sure it's never been taken apart. I ordered a replacement fan, but in the end I replaced both of them as the second one was also on its way out. This particular version is the Sapphire Nitro Plus with the dual BIOS switch, but the cooler is used on a lot of models and it is relatively easy to take apart. Just make sure you take your time so you don't damage the thermal pads if you want to reuse them. I always manage to run out of these and forget to order more. Putting it back together after new paste is applied is the reverse of the dismantling process. And yes, I know, I've been criticized for not doing what I preach and putting too much paste and not spreading it properly. I usually only do that with Cryonaut these days. A bit of care needs to be taken with the fan and LED cables, but once those are in, it's just a matter of putting all the screws back in the right place. Make sure to sort out the screws because they are not all the same length and you don't want to push the longer ones where do not belong. I usually end up disabling RGB on most of my hardware, not for any overclocking purpose like a lot of people claim to do, but just because my case is an IKEA TV stand and the doors do not have any glass. The previous case that I used for about 10 years was an overkill custom built contraption that was made of an ABS network cabinet you commonly find on the street corners, and that one didn't have a window either, so I kinda developed an indifference to RGB features, so a dedicated LED off button is welcome here. Back to the GPU at hand, the two fans have a nice clipping feature on one end and a screw on the other that makes replacing one very easy, and since this is such a prevalent cooling solution, they can be found for relatively cheap, around £10 with quick delivery or £5 off if you are willing to wait for China Post. Considering that this card will probably never receive another set of fans or a repaste, I think that the 7C drop in temperature is a very good result. I haven't enabled any fan profiles and the temperature in the room was the same between the two runs. In Heaven, which is an older benchmark, the RX 480 does predictably very well, and while it ekes out the RX 570, it loses out by about 2 FPS to the GTX 970. My suspicion here is that the Nvidia card does a better job with tessellation, but even so the RX 480 maintains a higher minimum FPS. Superposition sees the RX 480 take the lead against the aforementioned cards with a very respectable 42 FPS average. This might not seem like a lot compared to the 970's 40 average and the 570's 41, but the frame time consistency is also better, well, on paper at least. I must admit I don't think I will be able to tell the difference with my naked eye. The first esports title that we are going to be taking a look at is Rocket League, and at 1080p with the settings as high as they will go, it hovers around the 200 FPS mark. This is about as expected for a less demanding game, and honestly, if all you are doing was playing Rocket League, then this would be the ideal GPU for you. Next, Fortnite, and with everything on Epic, gyrates around 60 FPS, dipping in the low 50s briefly. With competitive settings it jumps to over 144 FPS constantly, so even those with the higher refresh rate monitors will be happy. I think that the good medium here is Epic with 80% resolution scale though, for constant over 60 FPS.
Welcome to Warzone.
Warzone with high settings and no motion blur at Full HD doesn't stray below 60 FPS in my testing. I'll be honest, as I am not a Warzone player, I just use the beginning bot match for all the testing and to keep things consistent. I don't think I would be able to blame losses on the GPU chugging here, and competitive settings are always an option. I was surprised to see ray tracing options in the menu, but unfortunately I am fresh out the RTX cards to check them out. Not much more to say really, this is the first time I include this game in benchmarks, so I really don't know how it stacks up against other cards and configurations. I really wish I could get back into liking stealth action games because Hitman 3 looks like a nice one to play. It's really amazing how this game looks, and it's shocking to think that it runs even on a potato. That being said, I was able to comfortably dial the settings up to medium-ish, let's call it medium plus, and get a great over 50 FPS experience. I must admit I really like the approach the devs took with this one to build upon previous releases. I think it adds value for the players, kind of what Ubisoft tried to do with their Assassin's Creed series, but actually done right. Horizon Zero Dawn defaulted to original quality, but I bumped it out to favor quality in order to get a comparable result with the 970s that defaulted to those settings. I wasn't really surprised to see that it came out ahead, but I was surprised to see that it only did so by 4 more average FPS. I thought that this would be more like 8 to 10. Hopefully this does not suffer from the same annoying texture bugs that plagued the RX 570. Why AMD won't release a driver update to fix this, considering that Horizon Zero Dawn is a sponsored title, is beyond me. Everyone's favorite bugfest, Cyberpunk 2077, was an enjoyable experience, well, at least until pedestrians started hovering and doing the helicopter at 40 plus FPS in the most demanding cityscapes. I set everything to medium to high and did not employ fidelity effects because unlike DLSS 2.0, this feels like Vaseline was smeared on the monitor when you are playing on the telly. The performance can be further improved by lowering the settings, but I found that some of the community developed patches will do a great job of optimizing the game settings so you can get better FPS with no noticeable drop in quality. As a side note, none of them were active here. This is also the first instance where the 480 far outspaces the 970 by an average of 12 FPS while using the same settings in the same areas. Like Hitman, Death Stranding is another game that will run on lower end hardware and looks good to boot. Unlike Cyberpunk, where the 480 was a clear winner against the 970, here it doesn't seem to be better, or worse for that matter. At least it doesn't seem like it's going to make any babies cry. Assassin's Creed with high settings and medium texture resolution will do okay, forging ahead of the 970 by 6 average FPS and with better frame times. In this title I noticed a weird discrepancy. While most games will use more RAM on the AMD card than on the Nvidia one, at least on the indicative game meter, for some reason the prediction is putting AMD about 200 megabits lower than the 970. I just found that weird. But regardless of that, this is the first time in one of these videos I can come to an actual conclusion, admittedly one that will probably not hold for long in an ever-shifting GPU market, but for spring 2021 this RX 480 4GB is probably your best bet in order to tie you over until the GPU shortage abates. I don't really see a good reason why anyone should pay double or more for the 8GB model, because going over 1080p will make it very difficult to justify the drop in FPS in most titles. Obviously no one should be under any illusions that this can play at 4K simply because it can't. Other seeming alternatives like the RX 580s that are north of £300 and the GTX 1070s for 400 or more should in my opinion be rejected until the prices come back down to sensible levels. And that's it, this video is over, see you in the next one.